Hey everybody, my name is Laramie LeQuieu. I work with the Evangelism and Church Health team of the Arkansas Baptist State Convention. We're here today to do a church help desk video. We're here with Travis Story of Northwest Arkansas. He's an Arkansas Baptist. He's an attorney. He works with the Arkansas Baptist State Convention. And this is our new Evangelism and Church Health team leader. This is Will McKay. Will, you want to say anything of introduction to yourself? Or?
Hey, my name's Will, and I'm 2 weeks on the job, and I'm thrilled to be able to be here with Travis Story and my buddy Laramie LeQuieu. We're going to be talking about something that is affecting every church, not only in North America or around the world, but especially here in Arkansas, and hope that it'll be beneficial for you.
Yeah, you know, as we've kind of seen this play out, we ran into some things that were unexpected. You know, I think when we started this pandemic, all of us thought, hey, this will kind of end fairly quickly. You know, let's just kind of make sure that we can do online services, online offering, and those kind of things. And if we can ride this out for a month or two, then we'll put it behind us and we'll get back to normal. But here we are several months into it, and we realize that we still don't know when the end date is or what may go back the way it was. And so now that we're seeing an uptick in cases as things are reopening, one of the real issues that we're having to think through now is, as a church leader, if our congregation has a confirmed COVID case, what's my plan of reaction? Well, what am I responsible to do? What am I legally bound to do? What am I legally bound not to do? And so, Travis, we thank you for joining us today on the call just to help us think through these issues. And as our pastors are trying to lead through these issues, just to have legal counsel like you offer to Arkansas Baptist on a regular basis. So if I'm a church leader and I get the news that a member of my congregation or someone who's been in my service has tested positive for COVID-19, what's my response? What's my reaction?
Well, I think that's a great question, Laramie, and everybody's got to ask that right now, because if you're a pastor, and I think we really just have to, one, make sure that we're really protecting everybody, and that I think there is an obligation to communicate some of that to those who are attending our church. And one of the things that I always ask is, what kind of setting are we in? If we're in a setting where we start saying, hey, you know, somebody called on a Wednesday and said, I got tested on Monday and just found out I was positive, but yet, you know, I was in church on Sunday morning. How does a pastor react to that? Well, the first thing to know is they didn't get COVID from the church at that point. So, you know, that's not like we're finding out that the church is a quote unquote hot spot. So it just means that someone was there. Now, one thing we want to make sure we're doing is some of the normal, safe guidelines that are already put out there. Following those, I think, really does protect the church, making sure that, you know, we're seating people appropriately. We've got adequate space. We're not having a big congregation gather inside. And if we're doing those things, then the risk should be minimalized. Now, what do you do when you're a pastor? First of all, we also have to understand who we're talking about and what kind of potential exposure there was. So if it was something where it's somebody who just came to church, right? They were just coming, they sat in, you know, the audience and the pews, then that's kind of one situation. There's another one if it's a staff member and they were, you know, interacting with people. So that's something that we've got to make some decisions based on. If we've got somebody who comes in and they were just there, and you get that random phone call that says I tested positive, you know, there's a couple of things to know. One, there is a HIPAA law, and that HIPAA law prohibits you from necessarily rebroadcasting that information without somebody's approval. So what you don't want to do is say, Brother Joe just called, and I'm going to blast this out to everybody and say, Brother Joe's infected and everybody need to pray. Now, that sounds good, but there are some privacy laws. If Brother Joe asks for prayer, that's an okay thing. Okay. If we just take that information he's sharing with us, trying to protect people, then we don't necessarily need to be the ones rebroadcasting that. Now, if Brother Joe wants to put that on Facebook and say, pray for me, that's fine. Once it's out in the public, that's an okay thing to do. But we don't want to take private information and just try to necessarily be the one who spreads that everywhere. But if we were going to communicate that, we would be really specific in exactly what we know. If someone called in and we were going to give notice to people, and some of this we'll talk about how we're going to give notice and what a proper way is, but we need to be clear. We can't say somebody was, spreading it here, because we don't know that. We don't know how infectious they were. We just have to say that we've had a report that somebody who attended on Sunday has now tested positive. That's all we know. And so if we're going to communicate, that's the proper level we're going to communicate. Now, one thing I would just caution pastors, if we have somebody who's on staff, like if they're an employee of the church, right? So you've got your pastor or your music minister or something like that. They also have additional rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, so the ADA, and we don't want to be publicly disclosing that without their approval either. So if our music minister has it and they were shaking hands with everybody, we probably need to tell somebody that that's happening, but we need to make sure our staff, our employee, if you will, has given us permission to share their name and who that was before we just go plastering it all over an email or social media or something like that.
So would it be best in that scenario for the pastor to maybe announce from their own Facebook account, this is what happened, I've been infected, and then let the church maybe repost that information?
If they're going to do that and they're given permission, then yes. So
Okay.
that would be a good way to do it, to have them do it or a family member, make that statement first. And then the church can pick up on it and say, we've learned this is the case. And so some of that's why the how we find out and who we find out from really does matter in this case, because we don't necessarily want to be the one who are spreading information that we haven't been approved to do. But if somebody else is, if the music minister were to post that on their own, social media outlet, however that is, then the church picking up on that would be just fine.
Okay. So it sounds like legally, what our reaction should be first kind of lines up as a pastor with maybe what our reaction should be spiritually, just as an under shepherd. So what we're going to do first is we're going to reach out to that person or that family just to check in with them about the situation, to check on them so that they know that we care for them, that we're showing concern and compassion for them. But then also as a part of that conversation where we're checking on them just to be a pastor to them, we're also kind of talking through the legalities of, are we able to share this and just kind of talk through those issues as well.
I think that's real important. And, the kind of contact is important too. When we talk about if you're in a normal church service, the contact that a lot of people are going to have with each other, if we're following the guidelines the Arkansas Health Department's put out there, is really going to be pretty minimal. Now, some churches are working towards or have opened, for example, kids ministry. Now, that's a little bit different animal. If we've got a preschool ministry and we find out that, somebody in one of the rooms has tested positive, then we really do want to give individual notice to that. And so one of the encouragements that I would have is have really good records, whether you're using a software program or, just good old pen and paper, to make sure we knew exactly who was in what room. Some churches are going to multiple services right now. So if we've got, multiple services, who was in, room 1 at this service, and if, one of those kids were to test positive and come, we'd want to inform the families of all those kids that they were in a room with somebody who did test positive, and that's going to be a lot closer. And the guidelines for that are just different. And so, we want to make sure we do that. And I know we've previously done some other help desk videos talking about those and talking about making sure we have records for the workers. So we have some of the screenings. And so I'd refer you to those, but that would be a little bit different situation. And the notice would be different. We're not trying to broadcast that. We're just trying to tell those, 5 other families that were in the room with that individual, kid who now tested positive. We're just going to notify them, and that's all we would need to do.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess so that kind of covers where we're at from a communication perspective. But practically, what do we need to do in our facilities? What about if we're currently having services or meetings? Do we need to go back to online meetings for a period of time, or how do we respond from in regards to our services and in regards to our facilities?
I think one of the things that, I would just encourage people to look at is we don't necessarily have to quarantine the facility for 14 days, right? And there's a lot of people who seem to think that that's got to happen. I think that is just not necessary from a legal standpoint or apparently a health standpoint from what everybody's said. I do think it would be appropriate if we knew that something had, somebody had been there in the past. Normally right now with testing, we're not going to know that, between two services on a Sunday morning. But the appropriate response would be to make sure that we've, done a thorough cleaning. A lot of churches are doing that really well right now anyway. But if we haven't, we'd want to make sure that we did that again. And we just want to sanitize all of the area. And there's a lot of good ways to do that. The CDC has guidelines on which kind of materials, disinfectants you can use. And one of the important things I point out to people on there is there's a time period for each of the different chemicals. So if you're using a specific chemical, one of the things that it requires is a rest period. So if you're spraying everything down, different chemicals have different time periods. So if it's a 10-minute wait time, we need to leave it for 10 minutes. And I think the proper thing to do would just be make sure we clean. Typically, a lot of the guidelines for, let's say, daycares, they would have you clean the first day, clean the second day, and reopen on the third day. Okay. And so I think that would be a really prudent way to go. I don't know that you would necessarily have to go back online unless we had a massive outbreak within the church. I mean, if you came in and said 20 people have now come down with it, then that's probably a good time to, maybe go back to an online only format for, a week or two and then resume in person. But it would be a really significant event, way more than just one person calling and said, "Hey, I tested positive," because under the scenario I was talking about earlier, they didn't likely get it at church. They just, became symptomatic sometime in that period, right after they had attended church.
Yeah, so Sunday to Sunday, that's going to give you plenty of time to communicate with the individual or the family, communicate with those who have opted in to be, to receive messages regarding those things or those directly affected, and to adequately clean the building a couple times before the next weekend service.
I think that's plenty of time. I mean, even if you found out on Wednesday, you've still got plenty of time to hold your service on a Sunday. Okay. And so I think that's a good, it's a good and prudent step that any pastor could take and feel good that they've done the right thing so they can still continue in-person worship.
Okay. That's great. Travis, basically you're talking about having a clear plan, a thorough plan, communicating that plan, and then basically just sticking to the plan. What potential liability is there for a church that articulates a pretty clear plan about distances, about masks, about seating arrangement, but then after a few weeks, they just get tired of fighting the battle with folks about where they're going to sit and what they're going to do, and then they find out a few weeks later somebody comes down with the virus? What potential exposure is there for the church in that case?
So one of the worst things any church can do is do something than they say they're going to do when it comes to a legal problem. And when I say this, I've helped a lot of churches through issues. And the first thing that anytime a big issue comes up and we have a lawsuit or whatnot, the first thing the attorneys are going to go to is the actual document. Show me the plan, show me the policy, show me your bylaws, show me whatever you've got. Wherever that is, whatever that policy is, we need to stick to it. If we're done sticking to it and we're saying, hey, we're done with this type of policy, then we need to make sure that policy is basically retired. If that's not going to happen, you've got to stick to it, because you're actually going to increase your liability if we're telling people this is what we're going to do on Sunday and then you end up doing something totally different. So that's going to hurt the church way worse than just saying, this is what we're doing. These are the guidelines we're going to follow. We followed those guidelines. We made sure we followed those guidelines. And then if somebody comes in and says, hey, I was exposed, you point to it. These are our guidelines. These are our policies and procedures, and we did them. And at that point, it's just a lot harder to actually have an event where the church is going to suffer any liability damage. And ultimately, I always say, the thing we're trying to avoid is liability, because what does that do? That costs the church money. And anytime we deal with that, that becomes a stewardship issue. Because if you have to pay money out, even if it's a deductible for your insurance policy, and they're going to bear most of the burden, you're still having to spend money that you wouldn't otherwise have to spend. And that directly affects, what you can do in ministry.
Right. Okay. So what about an instance where the plan is pretty locked down as far as what we do on Sunday mornings with with the way we enter into the worship center, the way that we exit, what we do while we're there. But then one of our longtime families in the church, they want to use the fellowship hall for a baby shower. But yet we can't, maybe the church isn't in the position to be able to guarantee that the same procedures will be, followed through on that Saturday afternoon that are also followed on Sunday morning. Is that a big deal? Is that going to put the church at risk or not?
I think it really can put the church at risk, and we have to treat everything right now with the utmost care. We can't have two different standards of care. If we're having people come on, our church property, we need to make sure that we're treating that seriously. And so, the first question the church is just going to have to ask is, I understand they're a longtime member, but is that something we're even going to do right now? And so that's a question that church leadership's got to decide. And if they are, so I think a good answer right now is, hey, maybe we're just going to hang off on that for a little bit. Those would be the kind of things I would say maybe we put pause onto, not in-person worship. But if they're going to go ahead and do it, then we need to make sure that we're adding things to probably what we've already got, hopefully at least, is like a facility use policy and some kind of agreement with whoever's using it. And I know that some churches have that, some churches don't. This is a time where those kind of things are almost mandatory, because we need to make sure if they're going to be the ones responsible for it, they know this is what we have to do, and they're agreeing to follow those guidelines. Because if we don't, we're potentially opening the church up for a lot of liability. And we don't want to do that, even though it's an integral part of what the church does. I mean, having wedding showers or baby showers, that's a really important part of life for a lot of our, a lot of churches members. But we need to make sure that we're really clear that if they're going to do it, there's certain requirements they have to follow, and then they need to agree that they're going to actually, do that. And one of the things we might even want to add is basically either a liability or indemnification or a liability waiver, so that people coming in may say, hey, we're not going to sue the church if we're attending this shower. So we've talked about liability waivers before in some of these help desk videos. So we either want to do that, or we want to have whoever's, hosting whatever we're talking about, a baby shower, wedding shower, where they would actually say, if the church got sued, we're actually standing behind that. And, that also just has the effect of making everybody be real careful when they, taking the policies and procedures really seriously.
Gotcha. So last question I have for you. Let's say that it's not necessarily on campus, but churches are, they're getting frustrated and tired of not being able to gather for small group Bible study. What about a church that implements a strategy of using home groups to then go out in different homes around the neighborhood? Do they incur any kind of liability in the case that one of those church sanctioned groups, it's found out that weeks down the road somebody was infected and came to one of those groups? Is the church exposed in that particular instance?
So that's one of those hard questions, because we have to look at the connection and how we're doing that. If the church is, holding their volunteers, volunteer leaders out and really, doing that, there's potentially liability that passes on to the church. And so it's kind of the difference of saying, hey, we as a church are moving to a small group strategy where, we're encouraging everybody to be in homes. If that's the case, we also need to make sure that those group leaders are taking appropriate precautions. If we're going to, my small group has done different things, right? We've done Zoom videos, but we've done some get together in the park or do some of those sort of things. That's a little bit different situation because those are voluntary. People are just saying, hey, does everybody feel comfortable with this? If so, we're still, we still took precautions. You just want to be real careful with that. But if the church is moving as kind of like you said, we're going to move to like an actual strategy of we're not doing on campus small groups, but we're going to do them in the homes, then I think the church is really going to have to make sure that we're still living up to that standard of care that we need to make sure we have. So that would be overly communicating with those, those leaders who are doing that. Can they even do that? I mean, if you don't have a big house, you can't have 20 people over and social distance. It just doesn't work. So, some of the things that I've recommended are if we're doing in person, do them outside, church parking lot, or, somebody's home, or a park next to somebody's home. There's a lot of options. But if we're going to move to a strategy where the church is trying to do that, we just want to make sure there's some clear policies on how we're going to do that. And that would be real important to make sure that the church has those and then communicates those to whoever the group leader is.
So yeah, I guess as far as making those changes and making them concrete, it's probably going to require a church vote to amend the church facility use policy to include those things. So then your standard of care is it's proactive instead of reactive.
Right. And one of the things that can happen is, we can take kind of the standard of care that we're going to have during this time. And when I would approach, let's say, the church body, right, we would say, here's the standard of care we're going to have. And these are basically getting added to the church facility use policy, our policy and procedure on how we're going to run a Sunday morning, all of those different areas of kind of church life. So a lot of times we don't have to, create separate policies for all the different things. We're going to create one, policy and procedure dealing with basically everything COVID-19, and then apply that to all the different areas that the church is still going to be engaged in.
Yeah. Aaron, you've given us a great amount, and we're very grateful for all of that. I think it's universal. Our pastors around the state, around the nation, and beyond, they're faced with the same questions, the same frustrations. And so if you had to boil it down, kind of a 30-second word of encouragement or non-negotiable principle for them, they just found out somebody's attended a worship service and they have contracted the virus. 30 seconds, what do you give to them?
What I want to make sure they do is make sure they've redoubled cleaning efforts since then, right? That'd be the first step. To the extent that there's a easy way to notify everybody, I would want to do that and just tell them exactly what you know. We've been contacted and told that somebody who's now tested positive had attended on Sunday. That's really where I would stop. And then what I would just encourage churches to say is, hey, we're meant for times like this. And I really just want to encourage all you pastors out there. There's a way to do this. There's a way to do it safely. There's a way to make sure the liability part's taken care of. And we need to be there. We need to be there with doors open wide. And so we need to be safe and smart about it, but we don't need to be afraid to do it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, Travis, we really appreciate you being with us. There's so much about this situation that the way we've done church, for a simple way to say it, was not prepared for this situation. And so early on, so much of our conversations deal with how can we react, what can we do to just kind of get things even keel. But now as we go forward, we just really appreciate the time that you've spent with us in these videos, helping us prepare for these potential situations that could arise in the middle of this pandemic. And so we just really appreciate the time that you make available for us to kind of get your insight and wisdom into these topics, as it just helps our pastors and church leaders think toward these possible scenarios and situations.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. I think what you both do for Arkansas Baptist is so important, and this information is important. And my goal is just to make sure that pastors understand that this is, it's difficult, and it's different than we've done church before. I hate that you don't get hugs and handshakes. I mean, that was part of life just a few months ago, and now it's not. But we really just need to encourage everybody out there, and I encourage pastors. We can do this. If you have questions, let us know, and we'll help walk you through that. But I just appreciate what you guys are doing and really reaching out and helping pastors with videos like this so we can bring them some good information.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Travis.
Yeah, thank you for your time. If you don't mind, I'm going to just finish this out with a word of prayer, and we'll just pray over our pastors and churches here in the state, and we'll finish our time that way. Lord, I just come to you now, and I just thank you for the opportunity to serve in your kingdom. I'm thankful for the Arkansas Baptist State Convention and the 1,500 plus churches in that organization that have partnered together for the sake of propagating the gospel here in the state of Arkansas and in the world. And so we're just thankful for the opportunity to be a part of your kingdom cause. It's a grace gift, God, to be able to involved in such a mission endeavor. But we just ask as we approach these uncertain times, Lord, that what we do for you, we want to do well. As we carry your name and carry the banner of Jesus in the world, we want to do what we do in a way that is safe and healthy and just gives the church a good foundation and platform to share the gospel. As Travis said, we are built, we are designed for times like this. And so I just pray that during this time, Lord, you would just raise up Arkansas Baptist as an army of those who are ready to love people with the love of Jesus and share the gospel of Jesus in a time when people are without hope and experiencing so much anxiety and stress from uncertainty. And so, Lord, for pastors, I pray that you just help them to lead well. As they lead others, we ask that you would lead them, that you'd go before. And God, we just ask that you protect our churches, and that as the great physician and the Lord our healer, you would soon bring an end to this pandemic. We thank you for Jesus, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Travis, again, thank you, and we appreciate your work, Arkansas Baptist. We hope you have a great afternoon.
You as well. See you guys.
Take care.
Ya.